Dennis folded the paper and took a bite of toast. The sound of the newsprint folding went on for a microsecond longer than it should have. He flicked his eyes around the dimly lit room. Silence, dark, all as it should be. The cooked bread crunched loud enough in his head to drown out all the other sounds, of which there were none. Dennis swallowed. Movement at the edge of the table. He snapped his head in that direction. Nothing there but chip from mica. Dennis sipped at his rapidly cooling coffee without taking his eyes from the spot. And then his peripheral vision there by the stove. He shot to his feet. Nothing. There was nothing. He set the paper down. The news was full of stories about the alarming rise in pest infestations fueled by global trade. Not good breakfast reading. If he didn't start getting ready, he'd be late again. So in the shower, he gave his glistening carapace an extra brushing, trying to shake the creepy crawly feeling. After toweling his antennae, Dennis scuttled to the bedroom, put on sexy short boxers that accentuated his anal style, and dressed in a sporty undershirt with 4 short sleeves. The toast. He'd forgotten to finish his toast. Dennis scurried back down the hall. There it sat. Raisin toast. Except Dennis hated raisins. Son of a... He dashed for the table and grabbed the newspaper. Raisins dashed from the plate, along with pale white shapes that had blended in with the bread from across the room. The scurrying figures disappeared under the lip of the table before Dennis could get the paper rolled up and brought to bear. This couldn't be happening. Dennis was clean. Meticulous even. He never left dishes in the sink. He kept the floors swept and mopped, and also Dennis sealed the areas where the pipes and electrical wiring came in the house with pest-repelling putty. And of course, he'd sprayed the outside surfaces with pesticide 2 feet up and 2 feet out. No organic matter cluttered the perimeter, just sharp rock. That was how exterminators kept their home, and Dennis was very good at his job. Hallucinations, maybe. He did work with some very nasty chemicals, and if writer Wilhelm Burroughs was correct, one could get pretty high from the stuff. But no, Dennis conducted his work with care and attention to detail. Sleep deprivation, then? For the past several nights, little creatures filled his dreams, crawling into his ears, nose, and mouth while he slept, eating him alive from the inside out. Something moved on the counter. This was happening. It was real. They were real. Time to act. His mandibles clicked with nervous energy and his antenna waved, testing the air. He could feel them watching him, waiting for him to leave the room. So, he'd give them what they wanted. Dennis pretended it was just another ordinary evening, getting ready for work. He slipped his spiked arms into all 4 sleeves of his exterminator's uniform and brushed an errant bit of lint from the name badge sewn over the thorax pocket. Outside, the sky still held the pink glow of the setting sun. The city stirred to life, buzzing and clicking with another night's activity. Everything seemed normal. His van sat in the driveway as it should. With the click of the fob, the vehicle's locks chirped open. Dennis went to the back, opened the doors, and prepared for battle. He checked the sprayer tank, full. The yellow rubberized suit slid over all his legs and arms as if it knew the way, which he supposed it did. Someone called his name as he reached back to pull on the hood. He turned. Matilda. Her fat body advanced across the lawn in a pale yellow house dress. She gesticulated wildly as she ran, her antenna dancing and probing at the air in front of her. Dennis! Dennis! Thank God! Something's been eating my egg case. There's already a nymph missing. Please, Dennis, can you come before you go to work? I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm sure you have a full schedule, what with the evening news, but Dennis patted the air with his lower claws in a calming gesture while slipping the hood over his head with the upper 2. I'll come over after I've finished with my own house, he said, doing his best to sound authoritative and keep the rising panic out of his voice. It wasn't just his house, then. The entire neighborhood must be crawling with vermin. Have you come into direct contact with any pests? His voice echoed inside the thick rubber helmet. Matilda spit on her claws and ran them over her antennae as if to wash away the filthy thought. No? All right. Put your egg case in the car and wait outside. Get everyone out. Condensation coated the inside of his faceplate. With a practiced claw, Dennis reached down and checked the air supply valve. "Don't you think that's a bit drastic?" she asked. Dennis could see the segments of her abdomen rippling under her dress. He knew it was a nervous reaction, but his anal style twitched, thinking about what her oppositor valve might be doing under the fabric. He shook himself. "They're here, in the neighborhood. This is war, Matilda. Protect the young. I'll be right over." To punctuate his words, Dennis racked the handle of his sprayer with a satisfying metallic clunk. "Is anyone else home?" "No, Well, then you'd better go see to your egg case," he said, closing the van doors. "Oh, my God!" Matilda ran back the way she'd come. Dennis watched the yellow material slide across her wings as she retreated. He felt terrible. This was war, but he was a male first. Instinct. Survival of the species. All that. He pushed the thought away. The tank clicked into the place in the back harness as he advanced up the walk. The suit's rubber boot made a thwap, thwap sound. There, at the edge of the foundation, a line of tiny figures. Pale, brown, black, yellow, a rainbow of filth lined up and moving into his house. His house! Dennis clicked the sprayer on before he'd aimed it at the tiny, filthy mammals. "Take this, you mindless little cul-de-sacs of evolution!" The poison rained down on the humans in a deluge of destruction. Their squishy little bodies recoiled and writhed on the sharp stones. They scattered, running in circles, rubbing at their bodies before flopping on their backs and squirming their last. "Fuckers," he grunted, ascending the steps to the porch. Inside the darkened house, nothing moved. No sounds permeated the rubber hood. He had the advantage. Humans didn't see well in the dark. He took a step forward, scanning for movement with practiced, segmented eyes. He wished for the sense of his antennae, but necessity dictated they be encased in rubber like the rest of him. Years of experience led his steps to the kitchen. On the table, his half-eaten toast was gone. Fuck. Rookie mistake. He'd let his revulsion override his the better instincts of his evolved insectile brain. Rule 1, secure all foodstuffs. Fucking toast. His mind replayed the images of the humans running from the surface of his toast. A tingling in his exoskeleton announced the oncoming psychosomatic itches. His mind showed pictures of repugnant humans crawling all over his carapace. Rubber crinkled as Dennis reached back to scratch at an irritation on his hind wing, but the thick suit denied him the satisfaction. Best get on with the job. Humans were resourceful pests, but not great climbers. Not like the far superior and evolved cockroach at the top of the food chain. Dennis checked under the sink. There, a group of maybe 20 sat on a pack of cleaning sponges, munching on a toast crust. He brought the wand of his poison gun to bear. "Fuck you," he said, squeezing the trigger. A jet of sticky gel spattered the tiny beasts. A few managed to leap out of the way and disappeared among the bottles of cleaning products, but the bulk of the group fell on their backs, writhing in agony as the poison worked its magic. Dennis took a moment to enjoy his victory, poking the wiggling vermin with the tip of the sprayer as they jerked and crawled in senseless circles, their nervous systems overriding their scant animal intelligence. And when the last of the vermin went still, Dennis used his lower claws to throw the bottles under the sink indiscriminately across the kitchen, while his upper claws trained the wand on the cabinet. He lifted a bottle of bleach. Another 2 sapiens leaped for the cover of the vinegar jug. A twitch of his claw plastered them with liquid death. They danced and squirmed, their tiny mouths working. Dennis couldn't hear their little screams through the suit, but his mind produced the nails on a chalkboard sound anyway. He'd heard it often enough in his job. When the cabinet was empty and the kitchen floor was an obstacle course of hurled bottles, Dennis rose and surveyed the room. The electrical outlets were another breeding ground for the simian savages. He couldn't spray murder mud into the sockets for fear of causing a short circuit and fire, and setting peanut butter and strychnine bait behind the outlet covers seemed too slow. Then he'd have to sleep knowing the little bastards were in the house, in the walls, watching him. No, they all had to die. Now. Unbidden, the image of him firebombing the house with flaming bottles of alcohol came to mind. Tempting, but all his stuff was here, and he doubted the insurance adjuster could be fooled into thinking it was an accident. Sharp pain bit into the back of his foot claw. The curve of his thorax and the immobility of the hood didn't allow a view of his boots. It came again. This time, agony came with it. Something stabbed through his suit. Dennis's terrified scream echoed horribly in his helmet. Even through the intense pain, the tickling of tiny creatures climbing up his leg was unmistakable. He turned to run, but his eyes met a sight that overrode the agony. The pan hanging over the stove. 100 humans heaved back and forth, causing the cast iron to swing wildly. Dennis brought the wand up. The pan flew off his hook, knocking him in the face. The world swam. No! Pain, sharp and intense, greeted Dennis as his mind swam out of the black. White-hot suffering lashed at his brain in alternating pulses. They'd cracked his exoskeleton above the eye, and the ache and wetness of his foot suggested blood. Unthinkable! Humans were working together, using tools. No human had ever shown this level of intelligence in any study Dennis ever heard of. He worked to right himself, but flat on his back, all 6 appendages flailed uselessly. The effort sent a fresh round of misery to his head, narrowing his vision. Through his good eye, Dennis saw the humans climbing his faceplate, moving toward a crack made by the flying pan. He brought up the claw, holding the poison gun, but the gun wasn't there. The glove came down on the glass, squashing the soft-skinned humans and leaving a smear of red that effectively blinded him. Dennis thrashed, slapping and flailing at the humans threatening to breach his suit. He couldn't see. Wiping the faceplate only spread the gore into a thin crimson film. Damn, these humans were sticky on the inside. As the pain in his head and foot diminished to an almost tolerable level, another sensation crept in, the tickling of crawling Homo sapiens on his carapace. Their musky stink overpowered the sterile scent of the rubber. No amount of struggling and thumping brought his claws into contact with the floor. He only spun on his back. They were in his suit, inside with him, filthy, disease-carrying, unclean humans. Time slowed. The click, click, click of his frantic mandibles kept time with the wiggling of his desperate digits. His arm slapped something hard. The stove. If he could just reach the oven door handle, he can pull himself up. Madly pumping all 6 appendages, Dennis tried desperately to get just a little closer and a little closer. There! He yanked on the handle. The oven door came down, smashing his already broken faceplate. Tiny shards of plastic tinkled down inside the hood. It didn't matter. The door was there now. He could pull himself up, except first he had to work himself out from under it. The blow to his head made his thoughts slow and fuzzy. It was like trying to see clearly at the bottom of a bowl of soup. Itching irritation between the segments of his abdomen brought his mind into focus. They were attacking him at his weakest points, the joints. Filthy, squishy fuckers. Dennis flexed, curling his body into a C shape, crushing the tiny invaders between the plates of his segmented abdomen. Wetness oozed down his sides. That would teach the little fuckers. Grabbing the oven door with his upper arms while keeping his thorax and abdomen curled brought Dennis's feet into contact with the floor. The lancing pain, that right foot claw meant he'd have to crawl. Whatever, Dennis needed to move, to get out, to tell someone, anyone, that the humans had changed, evolved, using tools unthinkable, coordinating attacks. He risked a quick roll, bumping onto the containers of cleanser he'd hurled from under the sink, but the resulting squishing wetness in his suit was worth it. Dozens more invading sapiens were now so much red jam on his exoskeleton. Dennis made for the archway to the living room, crawling on 2 hands and 1 leg. The injured metathorax leg dragged behind him, and his remaining hand clutched the humanicide sprayer. There, on the edge of the ill-advised carpet, Dennis realized the full scope of his peril. A line of Homo sapiens stood, arms akimbo, on the threshold. The little figures were only a few centimeters tall, and even though Dennis was many times their size and an order of magnitude stronger, this act of defiance, of courage, and self-sacrifice so unnerved him that he stopped, momentarily forgetting that he was the evolved one. He was the one who held the poison-spraying wand. Something pattered on the outside of his rubber suit like rain. He couldn't see what it was. The hood's design meant that he only had a 180-degree field of vision. And that was standing erect on 2 feet, not crawling on all 6s like his ancestors. When the first of the sapiens shimmered down the shards of his visor and entered the helmet, he realized his mistake. The humans on the edge of the carpet weren't the threat. They were the diversion. Tactics. The damn tiny pests weren't only working together and using tools, they displayed tactical thinking. That did it. He scuttled across the line of human vermin at top speed, using all 5 uninjured appendages. The poison wand dragged behind him and bumped on the door frame as he passed. He reached for the doorknob, his arm a yellow blur. Dennis tumbled down the steps. On the lawn, he rolled over and over. The ape-descended parasites burst under the weight, staining the grass red. Then, with speed only a veteran exterminator could manage, Dennis doffed his suit and rolled again, scraping his carapace as he went. Finally, when he was sure this method could accomplish no more, he got painfully to his claws and stood checking himself, running his antennae over his entire body, probing at the joints for any last hangers-on. The gory liquid human remains on his shell stank. Dennis retched, clicking his mandibles and flexing his maxillary palps until the bile sank back to his gizzard where it belonged. It was only then, panting in the driveway behind the exterminator van, that Dennis noticed the noise. Screams rang out in all directions. His mind refused to believe it. Couldn't be. Must be a coincidence. Except one voice, the closest voice, echoed off his hard exterior in a very familiar and disturbing way. His antennae turned before the thought had fully formed. Matilda, in her driveway, just across an expanse of manicured lawn. Matilda's minivan rocked violently as she screamed within. His antennae told him the grass wasn't right, that it moved and rustled when it should be still, and he was loath to cross the no-man's land of hidden horrors. Instead, he scurried down to the street. The lines of tiny figures emerged between the iron bars of a storm drain. Fuck me! His mind worked as fast as his legs, trying to come up with a place that might be safe from the biblical infestation of pestilence. The blacktop scraped and stung Dennis's injured claw as he ran up Matilda's driveway. He opened the door to her van before he could think better of it. A sea of humanity poured out of the vehicle like water from a pitcher. The sheer mass of the onslaught toppled him backwards onto the grass. The tiny creatures crawled out of the lawn onto his body. He scraped frantically with all 6 claws, but there were just too many. The humans cut his last scream short as they entered his throat.